Be live shortly here. There we go. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and we talk about movies and stuff.
Yes, we've
Tonight,
watched well over 100 already. So
yes, we watched the first 100 that we talked about and talked about it, and so now we are moving forward, finding new movies to talk about. Turns out that there are more than 100 movies.
more than 100 good movies too.
Yeah, it's true. So this is part 2 of a series where we decided to compare and contrast the James Bond franchise with the Mission Impossible movie franchise. And the basic concept there is just that superficially you could say that these really are similar in a lot of ways, but what makes them similar, what makes them different? And so we decided to work our way through the Mission Impossible movies, and since there's way more James Bond movies than Mission Impossible movies, a selection of James Bond films, and comparing and contrast. And so we did part 1 already, which you can find the VOD and podcast of in the usual places. ChristianaEllis.com has that stuff. But tonight, we're proceeding forward with the James Bond movies, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Never Say Never Again, and Mission Impossible 3, and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which is the 4th one. So, I wanted to just briefly begin by saying that in re-listening to our discussion for part 1, I am shocked and horrified at a glaring omission in our similarities column, which is to say, both movies feature iconic music. I can't believe we didn't mention that. Because
I know. Well, and there's two parts to that. There's an iconic kind of theme score that they both have,
right.
but then James Bond also has specific songs written for each title.
Right, yeah, it's not merely the James Bond music, but also each movie has its own special song that plays during the opening credits, and that's a consistent
Yep.
pattern that will usually be after a cold open of some kind.
Yes.
Yeah, but so I just thought it was kind of incredible that that didn't come up in our previous discussion, given that it's so much a part, I think, of what ties these movies together. I mean, it's obviously not the only thing, but I think most people could probably hum a little bit of both both primary themes, just on the spot. They're that iconic, right? So, I'm not going to do that now, but
I was thought that might be coming.
I mean, I would if I didn't feel like it was unnecessary because everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Correct.
I think I did actually maybe talk about just the one particular, like in the first Mission Impossible movie, I feel like it has just one particularly excellent use of the main theme there. But in any event, tonight,
Yeah, and they do, and there's a couple. I mean, you mentioned the cold open. We really didn't talk about that. I mean, they both tend to have some variation of that.
that's true.
And then the opening credit sequences, they both have sort of an iconic thing. The Mission Impossible is the
Yeah.
fuse being
Right.
lit,
hmm
and the James Bond is the eye searching for him to shoot him, basically. Yeah,
hmm hmm
and some variation of that. Yeah, and the silhouettes and all that, and the
Exactly. Yeah. And so one of the things that we're going to be, addressing this time is because obviously we're moving forward with different movies, and so not every movie represents all of the parts of the, like the things that we come to expect with, say, Bond movies are generalities, right? Not every movie represents those in exactly the same ways. Um, and I'm kind of leaning into going Bond first. I don't know how, I think that's what we did last time, but how do you feel about that?
I think that's fine, especially with what you sort of teed up there,
Yeah.
because I have feelings about that.
Okay.
with these movies, or at least with definitely with one of these movies.
Well, what I was going to say just right off the bat is that the two James Bond movies that we have, just in the specific context of the music, I feel like, Never Say Never Again is notable because it was made by a different production company, and so I think didn't have that classic Bond theme. Am I correct about that, or am I misremembering?
No, it doesn't have the regular theme. It has a
Right.
theme song, but you're right,
Right.
not the bars or whatever that.
Yeah. Da na da na 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 na. See, I think people probably who know me well knew that I was not going to be able to resist forever. Anyway,
I was waiting.
but yeah, so it's interesting that just in an example that that is one of these movies that doesn't have this thing that we were just talking about is notable as similarity between all the Bond movies. And then the thing I was going to say about The Spy Who Loved Me is that while it certainly does have one of those opening song sequences, I mean, I haven't seen every single James Bond movie, and I know that people have different opinions about the different Bond songs or whatever, but I just don't like this one. Not that it's a bad song, but just that it feels like it should be in a coffee commercial, not a James Bond spy action movie. That's my feeling on the subject, anyway.
I agree with you, but one of the things that I think, as far as representative of what the movies do,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually pretty perfect. Because it was somebody who it was Carly Simon,
Mm-hmm.
so it was a pop artist, very popular at the time, very much in the theme of what songs sounded like at that time. So while I agree with you, it's not my favorite Bond song by any means. I think I even shared with you a ranking of Bond
Yeah.
songs where it was very near the end,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that it has been appropriated back in the '80s for like a Folgers commercial.
And where we grew up, Safeway is a chain of grocery stores, and they had used that song in those commercials as well.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was a Safeway commercial where they were serving a Folgers brand of coffee
Well,
because they kind
yeah.
of
So
do that
there's
sometimes where
actually
they
been
mix
a
them.
number of different commercials that used it. I looked it up.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a very sugary sucrose song,
Mm-hmm.
but it was intended to be, and I think
Yeah.
that's it's representative of kind of what they tried to do. While again, it doesn't hold up, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
you and I don't like it. It was served the purpose for what they were trying to do then, and that became popular. It hit tops on the charts.
Mm-hmm.
It was nominated. I'm pretty sure,
Well,
though did
like
not win any awards.
that's the thing about it though is that like as a song completely independent of James Bond, yeah, I mean it's a fine song. It's kind of like easy and smooth and maybe like sexy in kind of a 70s way, but it's not like there's no tension in it, there's no danger in it. It's just like the song, in case anyone can't recall, is Nobody Does It Better by Carly Simon. And it's just like, nobody does it better. And it's like in a major key. There's no threat there. There's no feeling like anything is wrong or there's any trouble of any kind. And it's just, it's, it feels like a lazy Saturday morning song, not a tense spy thriller song.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't like it as a Bond song, but I get how it ended up as a Bond song.
Yeah, I mean, like they're doing a lot of different things. Now, what I will say, actually, just in terms of like general statements, is that I liked The Spy Who Loved Me an awful lot. I had not seen this one, and
Whoa, okay, this
yeah,
is like for the Bond tropes. That's what I was going to say. This is like my favorite of all of the things that you think of with a Bond movie. It has
hmm
like to my not only does it have all of them, I think it kind of almost has the best of all of them.
mm,
At least as a sum of all the parts.
yeah, it is absolutely Bond in his 70s super cheesy mode, which I think a lot of people classically associate with the Roger Moore era.
Hmm.
And the thing that I kept thinking of, honestly, while watching it, is the cartoon The Venture Brothers, because it's very clear that the Venture Brothers is riffing on this era of Bond storytelling in telling a story that's set in the present day, like about imagine if James Bond in Spy Who Loved Me had a 10-year-old kid, and now the Venture Brothers is telling the story of that kid as a 40 something failure. And so just seeing all of these, elaborate, undersea water super tankers and all of these ridiculous, henchmen with the, Jaws with the metal teeth and everything. Because it's like, in a lot of ways, Jaws kind of plays on the same trope as Odd Job did, except that like it's just almost even sillier.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite villains.
Oh well,
Ever. Yeah.
it's obvious that
He's silly. Yeah.
well, they kept giving him ways to be cool, right? And then not only that, but he got to survive at the end. He got to survive at the end by being dropped into a shark tank and then killing the shark and then swimming to shore from God knows where in the open ocean.
Yep.
That's amazing. I looked up in the trivia. Apparently, in the preview screenings, people cheered when they saw that he survived and was swimming safely away.
I mean, I could see it.
Yeah.
I almost cheer. I know it's coming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the basic plot in The Spy Who Loved Me is that we get our cold open with more skiing, where Bond gets to shoot someone with a rifle made out of his ski pole, and then he jumps off a cliff and uses a Union Jack parachute, to escape. Pretty great. And then we set up that there's this, counter agent from Russia who was in love, gasp, with the guy that James Bond killed. Oh no. And then so they're both competing for intelligence about the. I feel like I'm misremembering some of the details of it, because obviously the ultra plan here is that we've got what's his face, the bad guy, with
Stromberg, whatever it is.
Something like that, and so he wants to cause nuclear war on land so that his little undersea Atlantis can be the last refuge of people, and he thinks that it'll be better that way. And it's a very, sort of silly 70s sort of plan, supervillain sort of plan, but it's lots of fun.
It's sort of what happens in Ghost Protocol.
Well, yeah, sort of. I mean,
it's kind of the same idea of like he's just trying to create nuclear war for the sake of nuclear war. I mean, obviously the sub motive is a little different, but the idea is conceptually they're 40 years apart and they're kind of the same. Yeah.
No, I agree. I agree with that aspect. I think where I was hung up is the part that I was thinking of cheesy 70s supervillain is the idea that the reason you want nuclear war is because of your secret undersea Atlantis city that you think is going to restart humanity in a purer way beneath the ocean.
Yes, that part is, you're right. That's very, very different, 70s supervillain.
That's all right. I mean, nuclear war is basically the threat in 80% of these movies. So, it's just like, that you want the stakes to be as high as possible, and it's pretty hard to think of stakes higher than nuclear war.
Yes. I thought it was interesting that the end result was more of like nuclear war for the chaos that it causes was similar in both The Spy Who Loved Me and in Ghost Protocol, as opposed to
the idea that somehow causing a nuclear war will actually be good for what's left of humanity in the long run.
Right.
Which, I think probably not true, is my thinking. But, but they are the bad guys that have these plans. So,
yes, it's very much like Kingsman, is that's kind of what that's making fun of.
Yeah. Or for that matter, Thanos in the Avengers Infinity War, it's like, that's his whole thing is like, too many people in the universe. I just need to cut it by half, and then it'll be good. I was like, okay. Although you're one of those weirdos who doesn't watch the Marvel movies, right?
No, and I was actually thinking about those movies when I was watching this because I remember how much I like Jeremy Renner
Mm-hmm.
and how he's had a couple of these stints where he's sort of kind of started it in an action franchise, but I don't know this for sure, but it always felt like he just never kept going with them because of his commitments to Marvel. Like he restarted the Bourne franchise,
Mm-hmm.
and then he never did another one with that. He's in this. He is in the next. He is in 5, but he's not in 6.
Yeah,
It's
he's in
possible because
5,
I think,
but not very much, if I recall. He's not like
yeah,
one of the main cast in 5. He kind of shows up for a little bit, but it's more like a cameo, I think.
yeah, because right in that time period, that's all the kind of 2012 to 17. I mean, that was the wheelhouse of when he had to be committed to Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking about that. I was like, man, I would have really liked to see him develop that Bourne character more. I would have liked to see him more in these franchises. I really like him as an action star. And I was like, oh, apparently I could go watch him if I just watched the Marvel movies.
It's funny you say that actually, just because I am not super a fan of Jeremy Renner. Not that I hate him or don't like. I wouldn't. It's too strong to say I don't like him, but I always kind of have this vague sense, like in anything he's in, he always feels like the one that sticks out a little bit. Like he doesn't fully embed himself in the reality of that everyone else is in, and that's like I'm not even saying it's his fault that he's doing anything wrong. I just it might even just be in my head that happens, but nonetheless, that's kind of how I feel about a lot of these sorts of things. Like in Ghost Protocol, which we'll talk more about, like I think he does a fine job, but his character is the one that feels like this sort of extraneous point that is really like his character exists to be someone who can tell the story about what happened to Ethan without Ethan having to do it.
Yeah, well, and his is also, I feel like, same as what it felt like they were trying to do in the Bourne movie, is that they were setting this up in case Tom Cruise wanted to
Yeah.
move on and just take on the production role,
Mm-hmm.
that he would kind of be the next Ethan,
Yeah.
just like his Aaron Cross character in the Bourne movie was supposed to be the next like Bourne character.
Right. Except
And it
those
just
movies
never,
kind of all just sort
because,
of.
and again, I think it's because of his commitment to Marvel, these just never took off.
Yeah.
So he was meant to kind of stand out.
Yeah, and
I think,
yeah,
yeah,
it's like when you're watching a TV show and it's obvious that one episode is intended to be like a backdoor pilot. It's like,
yeah,
why are we suddenly focusing on this brand new introduced side character?
right. Who has this kind of like weird, like, oh, he's the analyst, but then when it comes down to it, he apparently has these super skills,
Yeah.
and everybody's like, whoa, the analyst guy knows how to like disassemble guns at full speed. And it's like, oh, well, yeah,
Here's the
like, I had
question
this
though:
traumatic experience. Yeah,
Did anyone ever in the history of people who watched that movie not see that twist coming?
what, that Jeremy Renner was going to be an operative?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know. I've seen the movie so many times. I don't remember
Yeah.
not knowing
Well,
that. But
yeah.
I
I just sort of feel like it seems like, to be fair, rewatching it this time is not the first time I ever saw the movie, but I feel like it seems very obvious to me right away.
yes, I agree. I think it's. I don't think it's supposed to shock you,
Yeah.
as if like Simon Pegg's character all of a sudden could do that.
Right. Like the thing is, I don't buy him as the guy who doesn't have a ton of field experience. um, but in any case, we're kind of
Yeah,
all
we
over
sort
the
of
place.
diverged. I know that was
Let's try to
a
keep.
thing we knew would happen.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this last time of the idea of having to really be disciplined about this, holding to the structure, or else that would happen.
Yes.
But so we talked a little bit about the basic plot of The Spy Who Loved Me. And then the other James Bond movie that we're talking about is Never Say Never Again. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's the thing about that one? Why are we watching that one?
Yeah. So the reason why we chose this one is because of a number of things that you kind of sort of touched on. Is that this was a departure from their normal formula. It was a different production company. Sean Connery, who had retired as Bond, came back as Bond. So there's a lot of interesting sort of outside of the what's on screen stuff that makes this movie somewhat interesting that it exists, and they try to translate that on screen, and that's something that ultimately for me, and I'd be curious how you. I always find myself disappointed watching this movie.
Hmm.
I feel like it is so close to being something good, and it has some great things. I mean, I think that there's some cool scenes, like the video game fighting scene is pretty cool. The idea that he is older but still trying to come back, and he has to
Mm-hmm.
go to like this health camp thing is kind of cool. The Tears of a Lost set piece is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's some neat things in it. A lot of scuba diving, but it just this is one like kind of like what I talked about in Spy Who Loved Me, which has all the tropes and they sort of come together as a perfect sum of all the parts.
Yeah, is
This one,
gloriously cheesy,
yeah,
but it works.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's just such a fun ride on
Mm-hmm.
Spy Who Loved Me. And this one, every time, like, and there, I mean, there's a cool motorcycle scene in this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's all these little things where it like kind of gets you excited, but it just never quite delivers. Like the idea that he came back should have been cool. They
Mm-hmm.
have some wink wink stuff to it. That just it just never ever gets there for me. But I feel like it's an important because of the attempt and the fact that they while they hinted at the end that they might continue with this, they never ultimately did. You know,
Mm-hmm.
not because it's a bad movie, not because it's a bad movie. It's just not enough, and there was just too much. There's too many other ways they could go with it. That this just wasn't worth an investment after this movie. So
Yeah, I kind of I kind of felt the same. Like there were definitely parts that were good, but there was long sequences where I really just kind of felt my attention wandering. Um,
yeah,
and it just like it's interesting seeing Kim Basinger in there as this young Bond girl, but like the excuse that there's a yoga studio with a two-way mirror in this yacht that like some it seems like a really sort of hackneyed excuse to have a scene where we watch her do like aerobics. Like it just and there's just long sequences where I feel like, what am I watching right now? What is this? This is
well, and I'll touch even just on Kim Basinger. It comes
Mhm.
off the heels of us now having just watched Spy Who Loved Me, which I really like how they treated the Bond girl in that one.
Mhm.
Being that she's an agent, and it still has like I mean, it's still got the '70s thing and the Bond thing, and he's
Well,
still,
because we've
but
got the
she has a
bad
lot
Bond
more
girl and
agency than you would expect.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, because that we also have the like there's the good Bond girl who's the Russian agent, but then there's also oh wait no I'm thinking I'm combining the two now.
no,
Uh,
there's like two Bond girls in Never Say Never Again. There's like
right.
the bad girl that he seduces
Yeah,
for
I was actually I was I the
some reason. Yeah,
well the one that I was actually thinking of when I started to say that is Fatima from Never Say Never Again,
right.
who actually I think was one of the highlights of that movie for me, just in the sense that she's just weird. Like she's this sort of ultra competent, smiling lady killer, except that she essentially ends up getting Bond gets the better of her because she's so distracted by wanting to insist that he agree that she was the best lovemaking experience he ever had. And because she is so insistent on getting him to say that, she lets her guard down and he kills her. And it's just like, all right. And he
I agree
doesn't
with
just
that
kill
point. I
her, he
think
blows her up with an explosive dart
with an
shot out of
explosive
a pen.
out of a pen. Yeah, he
Uh
blows
huh.
her up with a pen, and it leaves her, stilettos smoking in a kind of a neat scene.
Right. Yeah.
And
Although it's again it's a weird thing where like tonally it's like that feels like a cheesy moment in a movie that had been like otherwise seeming like it was working really hard to move away from that a little bit. Because it's fascinating to watch the like obviously it's different people making the movie too, but you can actually see the era influence with the late 70s versus the early 80s there, where Never Say Never Again seemed like it was working really hard to say, no, this is the 80s now. This is serious. And which I don't know, didn't work as well for me. Because it basically, the problem is that there are a lot of aspects of the whole James Bond franchise that are pretty silly, and it's hard to play it straight without, you can't go halfway, right? That's something we'll talk about probably when we get to Casino Royale, because like the that's where they kind of decide like the only way to really play it straight is to go all the way, right? You have to leave all of the cheesy stuff behind. You can't have mostly serious but then a couple of nods to cheesy, because it just breaks the whole immersion.
Yep.
But so the basic plot with that one is again like what's his face again. That one, because this one we had Blofeld is like in it, sort of like background player, but it's like his main lieutenant of the film. That's who we're really dealing with.
Yeah, Luger or something like that.
Largo, I think.
Largo. Yeah.
Yeah,
Largo.
and so it's they've stolen some nuclear warheads thanks to oh shoot, I'm blending the two of them again, but it's again, there's two nuclear warheads, and they one of them was going to go to the U.S. and one of them was going to go to London. Like this was both movies did this, right? Am I crazy?
Yeah, I'm struggling to remember on Never Say Never what they were doing with the warheads.
Right.
Because I think I kind of drifted it as well, but.
Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty sure that is what it was. Is that because in Spy Who Loved Me, it was the submarines that were shooting the missiles, right?
The submarines got taken by that like submarine eating tanker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
Yeah.
And then so the trick there was Bond got it reprogrammed so that the two submarines, which helpfully had been taken over by enemy crew, and it was so we're not blowing up our own guys in the submarines, but got the missiles to shoot each other, and so it just blew up the two submarines in the middle of the ocean instead of wherever they would have blown, but they were diffused in Never Say Never Again. And I think in Never Say Never Again, the one that was going to the U.S. is like off screen. Like, the Yanks have got that one covered. We're just worried about this one now. Like, not like it's not serious, but just like other people are doing that one. We don't have to worry about it. And in fact, I think they do establish at some point that it was found and successfully diffused. And so now this is the one that's left. And it's the one where, that it has to be diffused underwater. Like, because they're flying around on those little submersible scooters and got the spear guns and stuff like that.
But which is all, again, like I said, it's got these fun pieces to it. It just doesn't quite all come together,
Yeah, there were some sequences in this movie that were like exciting to watch, partly because of how obvious it was that like the swimming around with the sharks. Like running through the shipwrecked boat while he's trying to get around because they planted the little like shark homing beacon on him, whatever that was. Oh, here's a little blinking thing that we're going to stick to your back and it makes sharks attack you, I guess. But I mean, some of those sequences were pretty good, but in part because like those are real people that might, I don't know if it was probably frequently not Sean Connery in a lot of those shots, but swimming around in this tight quarters with like an actual shark that was probably, who knows what they did to it to make it not actually attack or anything, but but a lot of that was kind of exciting, but also like I looked it up afterwards, that and the sequence where they jump a horse off the side of a fortress. It's like, that doesn't seem really okay to do that with actual animals. I cannot imagine that horse was okay. um, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I didn't. I've never looked it up. Did you find anything about it?
Well, what I found didn't say anything explicit about what happened to that horse, but it did say that there was controversy about this movie, and it was that controversy that inspired movies to start including the statements in their credits to say no animals were harmed in the making of this movie. That part of it was because people were saying, hey, are animals actually getting hurt? I don't want to think about animals actually getting hurt. It's one thing to simulate it with special effects or something, but you should not be actually performing cruelty to animals while making a movie. Um, and I think it was this movie that had a lot of people starting to say, wait a minute, that isn't, yeah. I will actually I do want to call out another thing in Never Say Never Again, though, that is, there's lots of times when you go back and you watch movies from, previous eras that there are elements that don't age well, but the sequence where Largo decides to sell Domino to Middle Eastern traders is pretty racist. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like you have to squint or like look into it or anything like that. You just watch it and you're going to like, oh, ooh, it's not good.
No, you're right. Yeah.
But it's one of those things where lots of times it's like that language that's almost boilerplate now on a lot of these streaming services when they have these movies where it's like some of these have depictions that were are problematic now and were problematic then, but we think it's still important to preserve them in for history and all of that. But like it's some of those things where it's like this one. It's true. A lot of movies at that era had stuff like that. And so this one is not like an exception in terms of being the worst of its kind or anything. But yeah, that sequence is not like by contrast, the one example that's a little bit similar to that a little bit in Spy Who Loved Me is when there's that amazing sequence where they're running around in like actual Egyptian ruins. Like I looked it up, it was filmed on location, which is frankly I think they would just not let them do that anymore. But in any case, they're doing it. But there was one sequence where scaffolding collapses on top of Jaws, and Bond's line is Egyptian builders. Like, oh yeah, they don't know what they're doing, which is a weird line on a couple of different levels, right? Because on one level, I read that during the filmmaking, they had him not say that out loud. He just mouthed it, and then they looped it in later because they were worried that the Egyptian cultural advisors who were there to supervise the filming on these historical ruins wouldn't like that line. And so they cheated it. Like they just had him mouth the words and then put it in later, hoping they wouldn't notice. But that apparently a lot of Egyptian audiences laugh at that line. But it's a weird line anyway, because the obvious implication is, oh, Egyptians don't know how to build things. That's why they built this crappy scaffolding. When you're standing in front of these ruins that have lasted for thousands and thousands of years. So, like, there's some funny stuff going on with that. So, like, that's not the same thing as this sequence from Never Say Never Again, but it's just kind of funny how it's handled differently.
Yes.
In one where there's some effort being made to being like aware of these matters, and one where they don't care. But so let's talk about what's similar and what's different about these two movies. We've talked about some of them already, some things already. So some of the classic Bond defining traits are there. It's still the same character, James Bond. He's still working as this espionage. It's still these globe-trotting adventures where he's trying to save the world, and have sex and kill people along the way, right? And there's still gadgets and so on. We got the submarine car in one. Does he have a fancy car in Never Say Never Again? I can't remember. There's a motorcycle chase at one
There's
point, which is
the
pretty
motor
cool.
the motorcycle is kind of takes the place of that.
Yeah. You have colorful villains to be defeated. You have the Bond girl characters. You have the opening sequence song and set pieces. So lots of basic through lines there. But as we mentioned, Never Say Never Again is departure made by a different studio. Does not have the classic music. It is a remake of one of the books that had already been made, right? So Moonraker and Never Say Never Again are technically.
That was Thunderball.
You might be right.
Moonraker's a space movie.
You might be right. Oh yeah, I had Moonraker in my head from another thing, but
that's where Jaws. He's
Yeah.
in Moonraker as well. Maybe that's
okay.
probably
That is probably why I was thinking of it. But yeah, but it was it was kind of and it only happened, I think, because there was like a lawsuit, right? Like somehow when they made Thunderball, there was some aspect of it that allowed the part of the rights to make a movie based on that book to escape to another studio, and that's the only reason that like they could do it.
maybe. Yeah.
I think that's the case. I don't have all of the details ready at hand, but I believe that was the case. So there's some different elements there, and also because I definitely remember reading that they did have to change the plot a little bit to deal with Bond being older. Although Sean Connery's technically younger than Roger Moore was at that time, which is.
Yes.
But he does look older than he did when he had previously played, and there was a departure, a time period where he was gone. So like it makes sense to have him like, coming back from retirement. I will say I did really like the cold open where we see sort of the classic infiltration, only to have him end up getting stabbed by the girl, only for it to then be revealed as a training exercise.
Yes,
And the implication.
Good. Yeah.
The implication being from the beginning that we see him still be awesome, but it's made clear maybe not as awesome as he used to be or needs to be, and to do the job. And so that's kind of the whole pretense of sending him off to this spa. Gosh, I'm just finding it fascinating how much I keep blending these two movies together, even despite the fact that we just talked about how one of them was one that we liked because it's this classic cheesy 70s Bond at its height, and the other one is kind of trying to do its own sort of like it's a branch off the highway of the Bond franchise, except that there's enough basic similarities still that they kind of map over each other still.
Yeah, I mean, the plots have similarities, but I don't know. It's harder for me to. I mean, I guess from an actual yes, what specifically plot stuff happens, I can see why they blend. But as far as these two movies, like, it's not that it's not that I dislike Never Say Never Again. I always feel like it's going to be better than it is, and I've seen it many, many times, and it does the same thing to me every time, just like it did this watch. And The Spy Who Loved Me is almost like the opposite. Like it continues to over deliver in how good it is.
Yeah.
I mean that cold open. I mean it's relevant to the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It is some absolutely badass skiing and base jumping stunts for something to happen in the 70s and have like a free skiing base jump stunt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty cool.
Well, and then just the classic of his parachute opens and it's the Union Jack. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, that's got to be that's like iconic, right?
yeah,
That's because it's so silly in exactly the way that the Bond movies are at this period, right? Because he's supposed to be a super spy, but he makes his parachute the Union Jack. But it's because he doesn't care. He goes around and tells people his real name all the time. It's not a big deal.
yeah, yeah.
um,
It's so much fun. Yeah,
yeah,
and then
and I think what's different about them that really is producing this whole sort of feeling is like there are several things about Never Say Never Again that, like, when you point at those individual scenes, like you mentioned this whole video game sequence where there's this bizarre holographic video game that gives you electric shocks, that Bond plays against Largo.
it's like the modern. They were trying to modernize the casino scene.
Yeah,
You know,
and
it was
like I feel like on paper I cannot imagine that sequence working at all. And I feel like in the abstract, if you described it to me, I would say that sounds dumb. But it does actually look pretty cool on screen.
yes,
It's
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 fun.
it's Tron as hell, but that's because it's 1983 or something like that.
It's 81 or 83. It's right in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, it makes sense that that's what they would manage to do. But so, like, it's weird, but it's fun to watch in the moment. But again, I guess maybe part of the issue is it doesn't really feel like it belongs with anything else, right? Well, there's a lot of interesting sequences, but the connective tissue isn't there.
Right.
Because, like, watching Never Say Never Again is like what keeps happening is there's an exciting sequence, and I'm watching and I'm having fun, and then it just kind of meanders for a while. And I start looking at my phone, and I'm like, huh, okay, well, oh, look, a motorcycle. Yeah, okay, now I'm watching again. And so there are things that are fun to watch, but it doesn't maintain any kind of a consistent through line that feels like it compels you to keep watching. It's just highlights in an otherwise generic sea, whereas Spy Who Loved Me just keeps going. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it even has some of the more subtle. Like, I wanted to bring this up. Maybe this is a good time to like kind of insert this, like the stuff where because I know you joked about how he always uses his real name, but there is actually a sequence in Spy Who Loved Me where he pretends to be a marine biologist
mm-hmm.
to go and visit Atlantis, and then there's the whole. I know you're not actually a marine biologist. I'm going to test you on it. You pass the test, but I still know you're James Bond, but I'm going to pretend because you passed my test that you're actually this marine bot. Like the
Yeah.
whole, like, what is happening here? Like it's too fun,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and there's just this, like it's full of all of these little side characters who are more interesting than they need to be. Like, I was borderline obsessed with this American submarine captain who was one of the prisoners there on the base for a little bit, and then like or Bond like connects up with him, and then he's part of the infiltration team. He wasn't one of the. He was the captain of the team that's supporting Bond, not one of the captured submarine guys.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, but that guy, who I mean.
Yeah. Because he gets in an argument with Triple X about whether or not like she should get special treatment and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I was just loving that guy because he felt like the sort of person who is like he's very good at his job, but he isn't good at his job in an ordinary way, but he knows that he lives in a world where people like James Bond are going to float through every so often, and he just has to get through it. And so it's kind of like, he shows up and he's like, oh, yeah, here's this Russian spy who I'm kind of working with because we're probably going to bang later, although she might try to kill me. It's a whole thing. We're going to infiltrate this super tanker where they're capturing submarines, okay? And he's like, yeah, sure, okay.
Yeah. So will you pilot your submarine into the tanker that captures submarines?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, lady Russian spy, if you need to take a shower and change your clothes, you should probably do it in my cabin because I don't really want you going through the rest of the crew. But then she leaves the door open a crack, and he's kind of consciously trying to not look, but his guy who comes in to deliver him something can't. And it's just this whole like all of that stuff. I actually just like really enjoyed it, even though it has nothing to do with any of the actual action.
Yeah.
And I just loved like throughout because like he's there with Bond in the base during this whole climactic sequence. He's helping with defusing, one of the the bombs they've got there. And but again, it just he felt like he is a normal, highly competent person who is having to just suck it up and deal with all of James Bond's nonsense. And I just thought he was lots of fun, even though he deadpanned most everything, but it was just kind of like, yeah, okay. All right, I guess that's what we're doing now. Okay, sure. All right, yeah.
No, you're right. His delivery is great. I haven't even thought about that. Just some of the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to say,
that, they're in this like super tense thing, and they're trying to figure out how to find the submarines, and they're flipping all the buttons, and then he's the one that figures out they're on the big globe.
Yeah, yeah.
James, look at the globe. Like so dead serious.
Yeah. I guess I think he was actually in a number of he's had small parts in a couple of different Bond movies. Shane Rimmer was this guy. He played Commander Carter. But yeah, so I just that guy really stuck out to me when I was watching the movie, just of how much he was kind of a like not a foil in the classic like dramatic sense to Bond, but a foil in the sense of highlighting how heightened everything Bond does is, to the point where it makes him a general in the U.S. Navy seem, well, I guess commander technically, seem kind of boring and ordinary by comparison. Even though he's helping Bond to go in and rescue captured submarines from a ship-eating supertanker so that he can avoid nuclear war from a web-fingered guy who wants to create New Atlantis. All right, yep, okay. We're going in there then? All right, yep, all right. Should I bring the guys? Yeah, okay. And it's just...
Yeah, and yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about his character, but now that I am, I mean, he is so good, and like, because there's the part where the extra tension at the end on Atlantis, where he gets the orders to blow up Atlantis, and James is like, "But I have to go get her out."
She's
He's
still
like, This comes from the top. He's like, "I've got to do this." And he's like, "I need you to help me." He's like, "I need an hour. Honestly, I only need 40 minutes." He's like, "I could get court-martialed." He's like, "I get it, but this is a person I can go get." And he's like, instead of giving him the 40 minutes, he gives him the hour.
Yeah.
And he gives him +5 before then he shoots torpedoes at it while they're in there.
Yeah. But it's but like he's just an example, I think, of a character that like you could imagine a version of the script where like that character doesn't even exist, right? Like you could have every single scene he's in be some just generic guy, and the plot still works, but it's so much more interesting to have him be someone, who we have Bond bounce off of in an interesting way. And I want to say it's like Amasova is the Triple X, the Russian spy lady.
I would just call her Triple X because it's easier to remember.
Which again is also one of those ones where did it read as cheesy in 1977 as it does today to have the sexy Russian spy be codenamed Triple X?
Yes.
Yeah, I suppose it.
It actually probably meant more than.
Yeah. Because now,
really
I mean, it almost only means a thing because of what it meant then. It's like not even really used that way anymore, except in reference to that. So.
Correct. It was just being clever.
Yeah.
And
but yeah, so much of
way of being clever. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a franchise that has a character named Pussy Galore in it, so It's
Which, by the
not
way,
subtle.
that movie's phenomenal. But we just didn't for I don't know why it didn't make the cut. But either way,
Well, we watched Goldfinger that had her in it.
oh, sorry,
You're thinking of Octopussy.
Octopussy. That's what I
Well,
was thinking.
so another example though.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think.
Which, by the way, speaking of conflating movies,
Hmm.
I frequently conflate plot points from Octopussy with Never Say Never Again, and it's part of what disappoints me so much when I watch
Oh,
Never
you
Say Never
keep
Again because
sort of.
I'm waiting for certain things
Hmm.
that I know happen that don't happen in that movie.
Right.
Yeah.
I it reminds me of just how like I made a crack last time about the Mission Impossible movies and how like Ethan is kind of rogue in 80% of them, something like that, and it's a little bit complicated every time, like we'll talk about it when we get to those, but it is just like I think three is one of the only ones where he's pretty much still doing what he's supposed to be doing through the whole thing. But in any case, so if let's maybe sum up
Yeah.
our Bond movies here for now. So I mean, I feel like in terms of saying what do they represent to the Bond franchise in terms of how much do they reflect these through lines that define the Bond franchise versus how much do they depart, that sort of thing. I mean, it feels like if you were going to draw a line through the entire franchise, that Spy Who Loved Me is just exactly in the middle of what's expected at the Bond franchise at that point, right? Like it embodies all of the things we think of as cheesy 70s Bond. It's just like so it's not really a departure, it's more like a defining film almost. Like
And it does them all so great. I mean, it
mhm.
has a really cool layer. It has really cool tech. It has a bunch of quips. It
Mhm.
has a beautiful Bond girl who's also competent, which I think they
Mhm.
try to get more and more into that. Um, it's just all of these things are so good. And then yeah, and I think where you're going to go then is Never Say Never is kind of the first experiment in kind of departing from that. And while it ultimately is not awesome, it does help us pivot away.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, it does
sorry, let me play
like
this real quick.
hmm?
Go ahead, keep
Okay.
talking.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like, certainly when we put it in this perspective, I think it's possible that if we were to, talk to the producers at this time, it would be one thing. But in some ways, Never Say Never Again, even though it's made by a different studio, feels a little bit like the franchise starting to try to be something different, as opposed to because Roger Moore made a few more movies even after Never Say Never Again, right? But and they were still trying to do the cheesy thing, but it wasn't selling as well, I think, which is why there was some direction away, which we'll certainly see more of when we talk about our movies, our next Bond movies next time.
Yep.
We'll get into the Dalton, Brosnan, Craig era, um, which feels a little bit weird to call that one era because I think probably Dalton and Brosnan, then Craig. Um,
Yeah, well, and Dalton, I think, when again we'll get more into this. I think he's more embodies what they kind of identified in Never Say Never is that
mm-hmm.
they needed to kind of change it a little bit,
Yeah.
and they kind of put their thumb a little too hard on a certain part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right. And then Brosnan
well,
almost
and
starts
it's going to be a lot of
making.
your point too of where there's too many nods to the
Mm-hmm.
cheese and too so it's too serious, but then it breaks. Which again we'll talk about next time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's yeah. So we'll get to those, but yeah. So I think what we have certainly in these two movies is we have one that's just like right down the center, you know, home run, exactly what it was trying to do and really embodying what people kind of think of as the Bond movies, at least of that era. And then one where it's more experimental for a lot of reasons that required it to be, but some interesting ideas, but overall less successful because the departures in many respects made it not feel as much like a Bond movie, even though it literally went back to the actor who originated the role.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And
So, oh, go ahead.
ultimately, I'll just sum this up real fast
Hmm.
because if you haven't watched Thunderball, it's not much more memorable than Never Say Never, except for one particular scene. It has one of my most memorable scenes in where he has a scuba suit that converts into a tuxedo.
That's yeah. That's a classic.
I mean, it's one of the best. Yeah.
Well,
So
it's one that's been riffed on a bunch of times in other things, right? Like True Lies, I think does that.
yes,
Um,
but this plays it when Thunderball when it does it, it plays it like it's this dead serious like
mhm.
gadget thing that he has. It's amazing. But
There was
anyway,
something
they did not
recently.
recreate that
Yeah,
they missed. Yeah.
there was something recently that had somewhat like it literally did it the reverse. Like he was in a tuxedo, and it turned out he had a wetsuit underneath it, and I don't remember what that was. I can't think of it now. Oh well. Anyway, it's fine. Let's go ahead and move on. Did you have anything else for
I just
these two
wanted to say
Bond
that
movies,
before
or
we moved on, since
yeah?
yeah.
Okay. So let's talk now. Let's pivot to the Mission Impossible franchise and our two movies this time, Mission Impossible 3 and then Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. So, like, right off the bat, we see a transition between these two of going from numbers to going to the subtitles, which is, I mean, that's a meaningful thing. Like, from a marketing perspective, like, that's a big decision to make, right? Like, because it communicates something to the audience. Because I think that there was probably, like, that happened at a time when there was a lot of, like, not that people ever stopped complaining about, oh, Hollywood's all sequels and remakes these days, because people have been saying that for 25 years. But the idea that you're going to have more movies just start to be, you know, four, five, and six of something starts to feel like each one is sort of lesser as
Right.
it goes. And so I think going to the subtitles is probably intended to try to make each one feel important in its own right rather than just another in the series.
Yes.
But yeah, so we have also in this case, we talked last time, Mission Impossible 1 and 2 made by very different directors and having very different sort of resulting films, even as they're still telling this story of, high tech espionage action with Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt. Um, but in this one, we have three directed by J.J. Abrams, and then Ghost Protocol directed by Brad Bird. And, otherwise continuing that same through line. But I think that there was some, one big difference between these two that leaps out at me right away is that three had, I think, the most the two big things that it does that hasn't been true about any other Mission Impossible movie, certainly so far, and then it doesn't get repeated, is giving Ethan a life outside his missions.
In fact, four absolutely obliterates that with like I think there's only one line.
Well, I mean, like, there's a whole subplot for Ethan in 4 about what happened to your wife. And so that whole thing, but it's certainly,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, but like it's meant to be this whole thing of
But
very
it's concluded with just one line when they're talking about revenge, and she says, "Did you feel satisfied when you got revenge against the people who killed your wife?" And that's kind of
well,
like the end of it.
well, no, because okay,
Or maybe I'm
the whole thing at the
misremembering.
end is that she's not really dead. It was a whole thing.
That's right. That's
It
right.
was,
Sorry.
yeah, it was, so what Brant didn't know, Jeremy Renner's character, is that the whole thing of, so there was layered motivations. One was Ethan Hunt knew he couldn't do both because as long as he is an agent, his wife would be in danger and he doesn't want to put her through that. But it's a question of could he live with himself if he was not out in the field helping save the world? And so the decision was made that they needed to essentially have her fake her death. They would do it for her, and that she would be off in hiding. And we see her at the end. Like, that's why he picks that restaurant by the docks, is that he sees her across the street.
I just get. I watched it a little bit ago, and
Yeah.
I get so hung up
Well,
that the end of it is the parking garage scene because of how cool that is that I forget that there's that extra 15 minutes that
yeah,
like.
yeah. Well, and to be fair, I feel like that subplot is not handled as well as clearly as it could be in Ghost Protocol. I think that they try to have a few too many secrets and reveals in that, and it really kind of muddies it a little bit. It makes it easy to miss what it is that they're actually saying. But what does happen is that they have her, like, there was a close call after previous times of her being in danger. So they decided, we're going to pretend that you were killed. And then me getting revenge on these guys is simultaneously something I kind of want to do because they put you in danger. But it's going to be an excuse to get me into this Russian prison because I need intel in there. And that's the whole thing that opens the movie, is that he is in there and they break him out. Right? So that's what happened. And the problem, like Brant's dilemma, was that he did not know that it was faked. He thought that it was real and that he had failed. Like, he was supposed to be the guy protecting them and failed to do his job, and that's why he didn't want to be in the field anymore.
That's right.
And so that's why at the end Ethan lets him in on, like, you didn't actually, you thought you failed, and turned out it was because there was a whole thing. And and I didn't tell you sooner because frankly I didn't like you very much. But it's also the whole it knowing that secret turns the whole relationship between those two throughout the movie on its head, because, like, well, I guess technically it doesn't. This is one of the things that's not clear, is at the end Tom Cruise acts like he knew the whole time, but that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it doesn't make any, because there's sequences where he's deliberately challenging Brant on, like, who are you really and everything. Like I don't buy that scene if Tom Cruise actually knows who Brant is. Like, but so that stuff is a little bit wobbly. There's a few things in Ghost Protocol that I feel like are a little wobbly like that, but overall there's so much in there that's just golden that it more than
I know
makes up for it.
it's one of the hard ones because it's probably my favorite outside of one. I mean, one is just it's what took a TV show from the 60s and 70s and made it into something that was pretty cool. So it's hard to not like one. But we already talked about two, and it's sort of like, it's bizarre, like John Woo, like, let's just embody all of this. And then three to me, I mean, again, I'm kind of combining a few things, but it's part of our discussion. Three sort of level sets us a little bit. It's not quite as clunky as, like, Never Say Never, but it's like, it's realizing that they have to get back to some sort of, they've got to redo this structure, and it's got to be different than, like, it can't be one, because one operated on its own, and it can't be two, the super stylistic, like, let's not do that. Let's come up with, what does our universe look like? And that's kind of what they laid out, but they were, they just, it didn't quite come together. There's cool scenes.
Now,
It's just
I love three, and I one of the
Really?
things that I love about it is that it seems like so much of it is operating on the principle of, like, a classic improv principle, which is, if this is true, what else is true? So, like, if someone establishes something in a scene, you can then continue the scene by elaborating, well, if that's true, what else is true about the world that this scene takes place in? And so what 3 is doing is it looks back at all the stuff that happened in 2, like all the masks and the ability to replicate voices too with no consequence and everything, and it starts saying, like, Okay, well, so if we're taking as a given that that stuff exists because we saw it in the movie, how does that stuff work? Let's show them having to make that happen. Let's show them the little machine that makes the mask, and how do they get someone's voice? They make him have to read the little thing and get all the phonemes, and then the computer creates the little algorithm. And let's have it make it part of the plot that they actually have to do that part. And it grounds some of the sillier stuff from two by saying it's not just magic, it's a thing that they're doing. It's part of the stuff that we can now assume was behind the scenes before. And
Yeah.
I think some of that's
So
really
yes,
cool.
I like all of those parts about 3.
Hmm.
I don't know. For some reason, just the movie doesn't come together for me as my favorite.
I mean,
And I'm
and
not.
that's fair. I mean, I'm not trying to tell you that you're wrong to feel that way, but like, there's a lot of things that I really like about it. I hadn't watched it in a little while, and I one of the things that I have to say is a departure again from the series. In addition, this is back when I said that there were two things. One was that it gave Ethan a life outside the mission, and then showed how incompatible that was. I mean, even before she is actually in danger in the movie, they make it a whole thing. First of all, the cold open establishes that she's going to be in danger, right? Like we show it's a flash forward, right, to her already in danger, so we know all along that it's going to happen. But then,
Yep.
up through then, all the side characters keep telling him, like, you can't actually like get married to her and just have like a normal life and do this. You can't. And he keeps saying, "Oh, I'm going to try." Turns out he's wrong. But the other thing that this is a departure with is that it has a charismatic villain with Philip Seymour Hoffman, um, who, like, even the other movies that have bad guy characters, they're usually not super, like, Solomon Lane, who's in the last two, like, they have characters that are usually like serious threat characters. But Philip Seymour Hoffman is playing a role where he's got idiosyncrasies and interesting things about him. He's almost more like a Bond villain than
Yep.
any other villain throughout the series, because all the other villains are either rival agent who's turned bad for some reason, or evil businessman who's trying to kill a bunch of people for some reason. Like, those are the villain types, and they get a lot of mileage out of both of those in this franchise. But Philip Seymour Hoffman is kind of the evil businessman guy, except that he's just so interesting otherwise. And I think a lot of that's just due to Philip Seymour Hoffman being an amazing actor who died far too young. But like, he is by far the most interesting villain out of the whole series, I think.
I would agree. Um, and maybe that's part of maybe I kind of, and I'm just thinking out loud here. Maybe I kind of like that sort of blank
No, I mean,
villain.
I think there's a reason why they didn't keep doing that, right? Like, I think there's something that really works about the way they've done it in other movies.
Yeah, like even if you think about 4, I mean, it's almost impossible to even like the villain and his henchmen are almost interchangeable.
Hmm.
Like, you don't really know which one. I mean, yeah, like the
Well,
one guy's a little bit older,
yeah.
but
Well, I honestly, like,
they're so blank.
one of my biggest complaints about Ghost Protocol is really a pretty petty complaint ultimately, but what it comes down to is, at the very end, that fight in the parking garage is so cool in many respects, except I do not buy that guy could take on Ethan Hunt in hand-to-hand combat for even 3 seconds. I just don't buy it. It
I know,
doesn't, like,
but
they
yeah.
don't support it with the fiction either. They just, it like, he's good at fighting all of a sudden because he needs to be for the sequence to work, and I'm a little frustrated with that. But that's a pretty minor complaint overall. But again, it's like, who's the villain in Ghost Protocol? It's like that old guy, and he wanted to blew something up or
Usual
something.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's like who cares, right? But I mean, I think that's actually it's why it's interesting to talk about the villain in 3 because it is that departure, right? Like what they realized, I think, after 3, and they set the template with, Ghost Protocol and have continued it since, is that you have to have like a threat, but that the spotlight is on Ethan and his team, right? We establish a threat, and what we want to watch is them defeat the threat. We don't care who the villain is, really. And I think that that's why they move away from that. Whereas, 3 is a little bit more like Bond tends to be, where they try to make the villain be extravagant or unusual in some way. And I love Philip Seymour Hoffman, and I really like him in this. And in particular, I think one of the things that you get when you have this type of villain is you can have those sequences like when he's got Ethan at his mercy and he's doing the whole countdown sequence. And frankly, the reverse of that when Ethan is interrogating him in the airplane, right? Like those sequences are intense as hell. And you can't really do that with a blank slate villain. So I like it, but I also see why they maybe move away from that later in the series.
Well, and I would counter, not to say that this is okay or a huge defense of it, but it's the blank slate villain is what allows you to have him all of a sudden be good at fighting in the parking sequence because it doesn't matter.
Bear in mind, I'm not trying to say I think it's bad to have a blank slate villain. I'm not saying that at all. That's not what I mean. I'm just trying to highlight the difference. That there's a difference in the approach. And so I happen to like it in 3, but I also like how they move forward with it. Having more generic villains by, like the villains are either generic or they are the rival agent who's cool because they're like Ethan is cool. That's where we get Henry Cavill in Fallout, for example, right? The guy who is like sort of an ally, except he's an asshole for most of it. Like, honestly, it's funny because I don't remember Cavill's character's name in Fallout, but in a lot of ways, like, I think that's what they're kind of playing with Brandt, Jeremy Renner in Ghost Protocol, is a little bit of like, this guy is sort of nominally an ally, but there's something about him. Like, he's keeping secrets? Is he actually a rival agent, or what's going on with him, right? And that's, the same thing they do with Henry Cavill in Fallout, except in that one, he is actually the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Renner thing, I mean, I honestly believe, I haven't read anything on this, it's my own just sort of intuition from it, is that they had intentions that he could become the next...
No, I don't know that for a fact, but I believe you are right about that. Because I'm sure that there were at least some people at some point thinking about, like, well, how long can Tom Cruise keep doing this, right? Now, that said, I mean, as of Ghost Protocol, like, Tom Cruise was already making big producer moves with all of these movies. Like, apparently, the original filmmaking insurance company that was going to be on Ghost Protocol was trying to say, no, you can't do that Burj Khalifa stunt because that's insane. And Tom Cruise said, no, if you won't insure it, we'll find someone else who will. And he literally had the studio get a different insurance company that would insure that sequence because he wanted to do it so much.
Yeah, and having watched it again, it's always in my memory as probably my favorite Mission Impossible sequence. It is.
It's incredible. I had my hands on my face. I'm like making noises when that sequence is going on. Like, especially that last jump back in the window when he hits the top of it and flips over and almost goes over, and it's like, it's so good.
Well, and it's done so well because that one is predicated on the one where they're different, but they're similar enough in what it makes your brain do, of when he's holding on by one hand and trying to kick the glass in, and on his final kick, he has to pull his hand out and shoot through the, and it's like, well, that was like a lower stakes version, so that, but they're already building you up to like, this is not only does he have to get up this thing, but he has to get through these windows,
Well, and I think one of the things that they start doing a little bit in 3, but they really start leaning into it with Ghost Protocol is they know you can't just have all tension all the time. You have to have release of the tension from time to time, and usually comic relief is a good way to do that. But what they don't want to do is have the comic relief be cheesy or immersion breaking, like some of the stuff we talked about with like Never Say Never Again, right? So what they start leaning into is trying to find the humor in the fact that these people are trying to do stuff that is really, really hard. And let's have it not go right sometimes. So like there's a whole through line in Ghost Pro. So like just like 3 starts to say, let's look at some of these things that worked almost like magic before, and let's figure out how do they actually do them. And in 4, the Ghost Protocol, that's where it's like, okay, we've established that we've got all of these tools and technology and everything. That's how we do this. Let's have stuff go wrong. Let's have, oh, look, we got a retinal scanner for our safe house that's in a train car, except the train is moving. we got to run alongside the train and try to get the retinal scan. Let's have the mask machine malfunction, and the
I
gloves.
love that part, by the way.
Yeah.
Back when the mask machine malfunctions, and they're just like,
Like,
oh, we're just gonna have to roll with it as ourselves.
We have no idea if these people have actually met each other already or not, so we're just going to roll in and hope not. and
But yeah, you're right. All those little subtle things, like the eye scanner. It's like, well, we have this eye scanner, but if you're astute enough, you can tell that it's there. Like the assassin is able to see.
Right. Well, and just the crucial fail. First of all, I want to let's talk a little bit about that cold open in Ghost Protocol, where we have Josh Holloway as another IMF agent who gets killed. And in particular, he has this fancy little contact lens that's doing facial recognition on all the people in the crowd to help him track someone. But the thing is, he doesn't see it like on a heads-up display. It displays on his phone. And so there's that last bit where it detects the assassin and pings his phone, and when he goes to look at his phone is when she shoots him.
Yeah.
Whereas if he was just looking at her and not actually distracted by his phone pinging, he might have seen what she was doing before she had a chance to shoot him. So it like arguably it got him killed, right? Now it happened to work out, for our hero's favor in the sense that the fact that his phone detected this particular person right before he was killed means they have a pretty good idea who did it. It's also interesting to have this lady assassin be kind of an interesting, like she's a little bit of a character in her own right. But it's just kind of light shaded, right? Like there's a little bit of personality there, enough for us to be interested when she gets kicked out a window. And, but it also gives us tension between our heroes when we have the whole situation of, the lover of Josh Holloway wants revenge on the woman who killed him, but they need her. And so this tension of like, she wants to, I'm forgetting her character's name, but she wants to, so you have tension within the team that way.
Right.
But it's also like the thing we also get with 3 and then 4 cemented in 4, setting the pattern is like 3 introduces Benji, played by Simon Pegg, right? Who, we talked a little bit about 2 and the idea of like, we still had Luther, but then we also had Helicopter Dude and Lady. And so like, actually I take that back. Like, Tandy Newton was good in 2, but then we had the helicopter pilot who is just kind of a nothing character. And then 3, we have a couple of other, members of the team that are like, not not a whole lot to them, but they're a little more interesting. They get some interesting things, like we get the girl who has, she's like, oh, it's such a nice car, and before she blows it up, and that whole thing gets some little personality there. But it's enough to really just be, we're still moving things along, right? It's enough to establish she's a person without slowing anything down. Um, but Benji, is like introduced as this side character who's not a field agent, but he's so good that we love seeing Simon Pegg. He's funny. His energy bounces off Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is in a great way, and so they definitely said, "Hey, let's bring him back. Yeah, let's make him just part of the team now. That's great. Yeah, let's do that." And
Yeah, because part of what he does is he brings that comic relief that you were talking about
mm-hmm,
without breaking character or scene.
mm-hmm,
Like for example, like there's even in Ghost Protocol, like there's a part where he walks in and he's like, guys, it was rough. I almost didn't make it, but I got
mm-hmm.
it done. When he was
Yeah.
like changing the
Yeah, and this is where we
signs
have
of
Tom
the
Cruise
and
like
everybody
literally
else, yeah,
still
just
laying on the
holding
floor
down.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it works so smoothly, and
Mm-hmm.
and he's so good at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
He does, yeah, go ahead.
And it gives us an opportunity for lots of exposition just because we establish he's a character who babbles when he's nervous. And that gives him an opportunity to say all sorts of things without it feeling like an as you know, Bob sort of thing. You're familiar with that sort of turn of phrase? Yeah. So and if anyone isn't, just the idea that sometimes in movies you'll have characters say lines that they would never say in real life because they're trying to communicate something to the audience, but like in real life, people don't talk like that. It would be kind of like, as you know, Mike, you and I record a podcast about where we talk about movies, and I would never say that because you know that.
Right.
But if we're saying it to an audience, anyway. But yeah, Simon Pegg, it gives us lots of exposition in a way that feels grounded and natural to that character. He's a very different energy than Cruise, but they play together well. And watching them try to do stuff together, like each understanding and respecting the other, but also just like one of the things that I think is a big difference between the Bond movies and the Mission Impossible franchise, like as I think we can probably go ahead and talk about that general stuff now, is that this is something that I've thought about in the past in relation to Indiana Jones. And it is that there are two basic, I think you can divide all action heroes into two categories. And one is characters that make everything look easy because they're just ultra competent and they do everything well and they're just good and you're never really worried that they're going to fail to do the thing they're trying to do because they're so good, right? And then there are action heroes that make everything look really hard, and it frequently fails in ways that they eventually recover from, but like when they're doing it, it looks like they're having a hard time with it because what they're doing is really difficult. And Indiana Jones was the example that made me think of it, just because Indiana Jones makes everything he does look hard. Harrison Ford is great at that. Like, and one of the key examples I can think of is he's trying to climb up onto the flying wing in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that German soldier takes his shirt off and comes down, puts his dukes up, and Indiana is just like, okay, just a second. But I think there is something to that distinction when we talk about these two franchises, because I think Bond, although certainly not everything always goes his way. He takes his hits. He sometimes gets captured or whatever. But by and large, as a character, he's really written and portrayed to be more or less in control most of the time. Or even when he's literally not, he still acts like he is. Right? We don't see James Bond desperate and afraid very often.
No. Yeah.
But by contrast, Ethan Hunt and the IMF team are ultra competent and they accomplish things that ordinary people couldn't do, but they rise, they're playing at the highest difficulty level, and so they are constantly hanging by their fingertips off the edge as people are shooting at them, and everything that they're doing is so hard, and they are barely making it, barely scraping by all the time. And I think that's it's one's not better than the other. Both can be very cool. So I'm not trying to say one's better than the other, but I think that is an example of a difference between them. What do you think? Am I onto something there?
No, I think you're definitely onto it. I think that. I mean, I honestly don't have much to add to that. I mean, I think you're correct in that. It's not that we don't believe that the IMF team is going to complete their mission. It's just it never. It's like the idea of the fact that like the glove fails in the climbing thing. Like that's just not something that would happen to James Bond.
Right.
I think to your point, and well, and also the humor of finding just a random other glove on the actually stuck to the window was pretty funny.
Well, yeah, like the glove that's failing so much that he literally takes it off because it's going to drop him, and then later it's actually sticking again, and he's like, "What the hell?" But again, like getting screams and laughs simultaneously from Tom Cruise face planting against the window when he's trying to jump into the opening, flipping over backwards and almost falling out and having to be saved. That's not something that would happen to James Bond.
No, exactly. So I think you're definitely on to something of that. While it's like you said, it's not in doubt that they're going to solve it, but you're right, highest difficulty level. You know.
Well, and we one of the things we talked about last time too, as a defining trait for the Mission Impossible movies, is that Ethan is the star for sure, but his team is critical. He couldn't do it without them.
Right.
Whereas even with James Bond, like he does frequently have allies that are instrumental in his successes, it always still vaguely feels a little bit like if they weren't there, he'd figure out some other way.
Yeah, he's surfing the wave a little bit. You know, on like he's taking what's given to him, and if it's easier to take it this way with these allies, then he will.
Right. I mean, it's like I was saying, like this Shane Rimmer character, the U.S. Navy commander. Part of what I liked about him so much was this feeling that he's like has his normal day, and then occasionally the James Bond tsunami rolls in, and he's like, okay, let's figure out how to survive this. But like he helps. He's an ally to Bond, but he feels very secondary to James Bond's heroic thing. He's helping, but it's still James Bond's thing. Whereas the team is critical in Mission Impossible. Like it's not only is assembling the team and giving everybody their own thing to do. It's so important, and what that produces in a lot of cases is these climactic sequences where you're cross-cutting between multiple different places because you have to establish what's happening to all the different characters, and you're accomplishing things that can only be accomplished because you've got Benji in the server room and Ethan dangling out the window, and then all the other characters doing their own thing. Like we get Brant in his magnet suit. Like that scene is weird. I mean, it's like it's interesting, but it also just feels a little like I like the scene between Simon Pegg and Jeremy Renner a lot, where like, so I just jump and I'll catch you, but I don't have any ropes or any harness or anything. I'm just jumping. Yes, but I'll catch you. You're catching me with magnets on a little rover. Yes. Well, probably. No, yes. It's just a little bit of like, wait. Yes, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure? Yeah, and some of that stuff is really great. But it's like, actually, I don't know. I don't really have a but for that. But yeah. But the whole point being that because you have this team where everybody is doing something critical, the plan does not succeed unless every single person gets their thing right. You get to have these more complex sequences at the end, as opposed to it being just James Bond there with his hands in the guts of the nuclear bomb. Although that actually just reminds me how much I liked the detail in Goldfinger where, he's trying to defuse the bomb and he's having not a lot of luck with it, and then the other people show up who actually know how to do that, and he's like, "Oh, good, yep, yep, go ahead, please." I'm glad I don't have to do it, actually.
True.
Yeah. But so I think it's interesting to watch. Like once again, I think we have pairs of movies that dovetail really well in the sense of like we have Spy Who Loved Me, which represents kind of the height of the '70s Roger Moore cheesy Bond. And then we have Never Say Never Again, which is kind of an experimental foray into kind of a different sort of Bond story, which has some high points, but maybe doesn't work as well as they wanted it to. Um, but then when we have Mission Impossible 3 and Ghost Protocol, it's almost more like a progression, right? Because you had one which establishes its own thing, and so when it's there, it is its own movie, and so it's very much up in the air still to say what is a Mission Impossible movie. And so when they try two, they're thinking, okay, maybe the action is what people really want. And it kind of got away a little bit from some of these things that we now think of as defining, like, the importance of the team and having the other members of the team be people we care about. The globe trotting action, unique action sequences, having things be kind of, again, like, I think of all the Mission Impossible movies, 2 is the one where Ethan is most James Bond like in the whole makes it look easy or makes it look hard thing,
Yep.
right? And so I think in 3 there's a hard reversal from that because our opening sequence, like our cold open, is Ethan held hostage and his wife being threatened by the bad guy, where clearly Ethan has no power in that situation. And then we have our next action sequence is him trying to rescue this younger agent he trained that he really cares about and failing because the bad guy put a bomb in her head. And I tell you, one of the things that really left an impression on me in that movie is the way her eyes didn't align after the little bomb goes off in her head.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have her whole head explode because it doesn't need to. It's just, it's messed. It's messed up, and that's, so having him fail ultimately in his primary first, action sequence there, that's where we're having a lot of backtracking from how ultra capable he was in 2, but also trying to ground the various elements of what's going on. And then in Ghost Protocol, it's kind of continuing that a bit more. It's really leaning into like it's the team. He's very good at a lot of things, but things don't always go his way. Things sometimes break down, and it's, I think, the speech he gives to his team at the end of Ghost Protocol at that restaurant before the big reveal where everyone else leaves and everything is what he's saying to everyone is like, everything that we had in our plan, every piece of gear that we had included, every single aspect of our plan went wrong, except for the fact that we had people who managed to pull off a victory anyway, despite all that. And that's what's most important. That's the core. And so I think that I feel like, that's almost like a mission statement of what the Mission Impossible movies are, became at that point. You know what I mean? Like, even though obviously, that's Brad Bird's movie, and we go on to Christopher McQuarrie ones next. Um, we also, though, introduce Ilsa Faust next one, so she's great. Um, but yeah, so I think I don't have anything else immediately coming to mind. Although I'm sure there's lots more things about all of these movies we could talk about.
No, I honestly, I think you did a really good job there over the last like 10 minutes that you just kind of
Oh, thanks.
summarized all of. I mean, that's why I didn't interrupt you. I mean, you really kind of tied it all together. So yeah, I
Ah,
think that is a good summary.
oh, thank you. All right, so I think then we can probably we can move to our next phase here, which is obviously with Mission Impossible. The next two movies to watch are Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation and then Mission Impossible: Fallout, 5 and 6, respectively. But for James Bond, it's a little bit different because we had didn't come up, when we were trying to create our selection of James Bond movies, it was a little too hard to narrow it down to just 6. So we have 3 James Bond movies that we're going to be covering next time. And do you want to say what they are? Because I probably could, but I know 2 of them for sure. And then was it?
I have to pull it. I have to pull it up in my notes.
I believe that it's the Timothy Dalton one that I couldn't remember. So I believe
it's
we were
Living
saying.
Daylights is the Timothy Dalton one.
Was it? Because I was going to say License to Kill. I couldn't remember which one we decided.
Oh no, I'm sorry. We did License to Kill,
Okay, so
GoldenEye,
License
and
to Kill,
Casino Royale.
GoldenEye, Casino Royale. Yeah. So, and I think that'll be fascinating too because again, we're getting one of each of those Bond eras and we're watching it kind of evolve as we go. Whereas I feel like obviously those movies represent a larger span of time than going from Ghost Protocol to Rogue Nation to Fallout. But it's interesting, I think, that in some ways, with Ghost Protocol,
I'll be right back.
sure, with Ghost Protocol, the Mission Impossible movies have now, I think, really formed and solidified their identity in a way that has been relatively consistent since. So 4 kind of establishes it, and then 5 and 6 iterate a little bit, but are mostly continuing along that same trajectory. Whereas what we're seeing with Bond movies is it continuing to evolve with each sort of new generation of actor. But so yeah, next time will be it was License to Kill, right? Like I was about to say Living Daylights again. License to Kill, License to Kill, GoldenEye, and then Casino Royale, the Daniel Craig version. And then, of course, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation and Mission Impossible Fallout. I was briefly distracted by you doing this, the 5 fingers.
Yes.
You were right, but I got distracted. All right. So I think we'll leave it there then for now. Thank you, everyone, for listening and or watching. And in the meantime, you got 5 movies to watch for us if you want. And but otherwise, watch good movies.
Always. Yep.